With Nosferatu doing so well in theaters, and his next two projects already officially announced, now seems like the perfect time to look back over Robert Eggers' career thus far and see what makes this director's work so resonant with so many people, and so unique from the rest of Hollywood. For some personal background, I was aware of and vaguely curious about his films for a while, but didn't become interested enough to check him out until I saw The Northman, at which point I knew I was in love. Yet it wasn't until I was prepping to see Nosferatu in the last month that I finally checked out The Lighthouse, a film I didn't think I would enjoy, but which came as quite a pleasant surprise. You see, his films aren't just the kind that have always been up my alley and which I could easily consume and enjoy. They're the kind that have challenged me and expanded my appreciation for cinema. I've never been all that into the surreal or experimental, the kind of films that leave you asking what the heck you just watched. But thanks to Robert Eggers, I now recognize and even love what such films can do. I've had somewhat strict standards on the kind of content I consume, and while I certainly still do, Eggers has tested those limits by showing me how deeply effective certain content and imagery can be beyond mere shock value and indulgence. Eggers is a filmmaker that has introduced me to new and complex emotions, challenged me to ponder compelling ideas in new ways, and widened the range of cinematic experience I enjoy, deepening my love for the art of film. That is the mark of an incredible filmmaker. So today, while plenty of people have already broken down his incredible talent in the more technical aspects of his work, such as production design and cinematography, I am here to look at what he does so uniquely as a storyteller that has made him one of the most influential up-and-coming visionaries of his generation. Of course, I don't claim this video to be a comprehensive breakdown of everything that sets him apart. I'm just thinking out loud here, and I hope you'll join me in the comments to share what you love most about his work. But anyways, if you enjoyed my brain vomit, you know where the like and subscribe buttons are. Now without further ado, let's dive into the dark, surreal, and hauntingly beautiful world of Robert Eggers. We humans feel a deep, compulsive need to understand our world. We want to have all our questions answered, and when the truth eludes us, we'll make up our own answers and desperately cling to them like our life depends on them. It's this desire that sparked the scientific progress that ultimately led us to take control of nature itself. Today, we are so used to having all the answers we could want about our universe that the idea of something we don't fully understand fascinates and horrifies us. Perhaps that's why the most deeply terrifying stories are not the ones with the most gore or jump scares, but the ones that leave us intellectually helpless in the face of the unknown, rendering our scientific knowledge and earthly wisdom utterly useless, and making us no better than our ancient ancestors, scared of the dark for what incomprehensible horrors might be lurking beyond our understanding. I am one who loves to understand everything I can about the fictional worlds I love, but I have come to find something truly fascinating, something deeply human and frighteningly beautiful about this feeling that's left when our sense of understanding and control is stripped away. And Robert Eggers is one such filmmaker who defies that human need for understanding to incredible effect. People often ask what's real and what's not in his movies, but maybe they're missing the point. Is there really a witch in the woods tormenting this Puritan family? Are the Norns and Draugr and Valkyries in the Northmen just figments of Hamlet's imagination? Is Thomas Howard totally insane, or is Thomas Wake just gaslighting him as his alcoholism gets the better of him? Or is there actually something supernatural about everything going on in the lighthouse? Is Thomas Wake the manifestation of Thomas Howard's shadow self as he goes through purgatory in a test doomed to repeat itself until he learns his lesson? Or is it pointless to ask these questions about a movie where the director himself refused to answer even his own actors' questions beyond a rhetorical, "What do you think?" Robert Eggers takes us back to a time when we didn't understand the world like we do now. He immerses us in the mindset and worldview of people who couldn't comprehend the world in scientific terms, who didn't know what forces govern the universe, or what evils lurked in the shadows beyond the edges of our civilization, and thus were forced to let their imaginations shape their reality and give form to their deepest fears. Today, even in our stories of the supernatural, we almost compulsively want to apply our modern scientific way of exploring reality to make sense of everything, binding the fantastical with detailed world building and hard magic systems, and expecting all the answers laid out by the end of the story. But Eggers forces us to abandon such ways of thinking, to question everything we think we know, and be left guessing what's real and what's not. The Witch takes us to Puritan colonial America, where terrified people facing horrible circumstances desperately sought someone to blame for their afflictions. They preferred their nightmares of witchcraft to the realities of nature, because at least their nightmares gave them a villain on which to take out their grief and hatred, a way to fight back against their misfortune. The Lighthouse puts us in the minds of broken people grappling with the effects of isolation and alcoholism, relying on maritime folklore to make sense of their crumbling reality. Whether or not there's anything more going on, it certainly captures the feeling of going insane from the psychological torture of such an ordeal. The Northman frames a man's vengeful quest in the cultural and mythological context of his time, justifying his relentlessly brutal actions with the beliefs that would have driven him, concepts of fate and the promise of Valhalla. In all these cases, the characters believe what they're experiencing is real, so why shouldn't we? Nosferatu is a little less ambiguous, but it still takes the same approach to its story. Taking place in Victorian Europe, the story focuses on well-educated men of science and reason who've moved beyond the silly superstitions of demons and vampires. Now, forced to confront forces that defy their understanding, we see their minds and spirits crumble with their realities. Count Orlok's introduction is even directed in such a way as to make you question the reality of what you're seeing, just like Thomas Hutter, disorienting the audience as Orlok's position in the room seems to change arbitrarily off-screen. He defies rational understanding of reality and forces the characters to abandon their useless academic knowledge to deal with this incomprehensible power of darkness. Interestingly, in Bram Stoker's novel and most official adaptations, the characters battle the vampire with modern methods by understanding his nature and weaknesses almost scientifically, whereas in Eggers' Nosferatu, the characters are far more helpless before this threat that defies understanding, forced to abandon their precious scientific reason and play by the monster's rules to have any hope of destroying him. However, Robert Eggers' Ambiguity goes beyond what's real in his stories and seeps into his themes and morality. What is The Lighthouse trying to say, for example? There are too many video essays on YouTube to count analyzing this film and trying to draw some deeper meaning from its dreamlike nonsense, and every single one draws something totally unique out of the experience. Is it a movie about men seeking salvation on their own terms rather than God's? Is it a movie about repressed sexuality? Is it about Freudian psychology or Lovecraftian existential philosophy? Is it all of the above, or is it none of them? If interviews with Eggers and the cast are anything to go on, I think they'd tell you that's for you to decide. I was able to accept the ambiguity in The Lighthouse thanks to the surreal nature of the narrative, but it's present to varying degrees in all of his stories, and it's been a lot harder for me to come to terms with in his more grounded films like Nosferatu, especially when that film really seems to have something to say. I wanted to make a video about his most recent film because it seemed to have deeply poignant themes, but I wasn't sure what exactly I was meant to take away from it, because there were lots of different ways to look at it. I'm going to get into spoilers for a moment, so skip ahead to the timestamp if you haven't seen it yet. Anyway, I love many of the ideas the movie explored, but their culmination left me conflicted. I wasn't sure how to feel about Ellen's sacrifice because I wasn't sure what the message was supposed to be. I tried to look at it as an almost Christ-like sacrifice, an innocent victim willingly going like a lamb to the slaughter, submitting to the power of darkness in order to destroy it once and for all. That parallel seems pretty blatant in the film, and I find it beautiful, but it doesn't really work because Christ was a sinless man, and his perfection was what made his atonement possible, whereas Ellen spends the movie struggling with temptation. Her final act is framed as something she's wanted this whole time, and she's finally giving in to Orlok's allure, even finding pleasure in her final hours with him. That's not what Christ's sacrifice was, so that parallel falls apart. But if this isn't a noble sacrifice, then I don't know how to feel about what's being said. You need to succumb to evil, let it consume you in order to destroy it? That doesn't make sense unless the message is that our darkest desires and urges are only evil because we label them as evil, and we have to embrace them as part of ourselves in order to be freed from them. This is the most common explanation I've heard of the film's themes, that Orlok merely represents the cognitive dissonance and the overwhelming guilt of indulging in hedonistic behavior labeled by society as deviant or destructive, and that we need to embrace those impulses as a part of our nature, and the negative psychological consequences of that behavior will go away. According to this theory, her final act was an empowering one, as she rejected the restraints of the society that repressed her. If this was the intended message, then it's one I despise, because I've struggled with some forms of sinful behavior many would say are natural, or to put it in Orlok's terms, I've struggled to control my appetites, and I've learned that indulging them is not liberating or empowering. It does not make your life better. Such appetites only grow as you feed them until they consume your life. However, even if I didn't mind this message, it doesn't really work either, because Ellen dies. She has destroyed herself in the process of destroying the monster, so you can't really say it was a good thing for her. Some have suggested that this is supposed to be a tragedy, where her fate is not meant to be seen as entirely noble or entirely liberating. Perhaps she did just succumb, and that led to her destruction, as it inevitably does. But then, why does the story frame her actions as necessary for the good of the world? Is it saying that those who struggle with temptation need to give in and let their own darkness destroy them for the good of society? Because that seems pretty messed up. As you can see, my desire for a conclusive answer led to a lot of frustration over this movie. But after engaging in a lot of discussions and debates over the movie's message and seeing just how many different valid perspectives and interpretations there were, I was reminded of the discussions I've seen over the themes in The Lighthouse, and I realized that this was probably what Robert Eggers wanted. He didn't want to be sending a clear, unambiguous message. He wanted to get people thinking and leave them to figure out for themselves what it means to them. This ending left me with conflicting feelings and forced me to more deeply analyze the film and its themes, which I believe was the point. Some films have a clear, explicit message, and while such messages can be powerful and beautiful, they are typically easy to extract and digest, and you can walk away from the film without having to think about it again. Robert Eggers, on the other hand, never tells you what to think, but instead makes movies that stick in your head and force you to puzzle out the meaning for yourself. And that meaning may be different for everyone. I heard someone say that Robert Eggers' movies are surreal enough to leave you asking lots of questions and provide a number of answers, but not so surreal that you can't find any answers, which I think is a perfect description of his style. Seeing all his work from this perspective really helped me appreciate Nosferatu more. I tend to want there to be one right answer to every question. I want to be able to definitively nail down the meaning in my stories. But these movies can't be understood that way, and they've helped me appreciate the beauty of such ambiguity, resonating with everyone differently, according to their own personal beliefs and experiences. His movies are more concerned with starting compelling discussions than leaving you with simple answers. However, I must acknowledge that every storytelling choice comes with a price, and in this case, such a level of ambiguity does come at the cost of some amount of catharsis, and additionally, it can lead to problematic interpretations. Like I said, the potential interpretation of Nosferatu that evil is only evil because society deems it as evil, and the cure to your guilt and shame is just to embrace what everyone tells you is evil, is, in fact, evil. Worse, one could see Orlok as an abusive, narcissistic lover, representative of the kind of powerful and manipulative men some women may find themselves drawn to for one reason or another, who promise pleasure while ultimately bringing pain, promising power and then never letting you go. In which case, the message seems to be to submit to their abuse and control in order to end it. To be honest, this seems to me like the most obvious interpretation of the story. To be clear, I'm not saying that Robert Eggers was trying to convey these ideas, but one could very easily take them from the film. I bring this up just to point out the potential danger of such ambiguity, that you leave the door open for your audience to take your ideas down dark paths you never intended. Stories are powerful. They can change people's lives, and I believe storytellers have a tremendous responsibility to try to change them for the better. To refer to the graph I made in my video comparing realism to idealism, link at the end of the video, Robert Eggers' stories are extremely high on the thought-provoking scale, but they're rarely particularly inspiring. As I said in that video, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but stories that deal in so much ambiguity have to be careful, lest they unintentionally leave their audience with potentially harmful and destructive messages. Again, I'm not saying this in condemnation, merely acknowledging the risks one takes in telling such stories. Every filmmaker has their own style, their own way of telling stories, and a certain kind of story they like to tell. And the best ones, the visionaries, the ones who'll be remembered, aren't the ones who never walk the line, who play it safe, who always please everyone by doing everything right. No, they're the ones who bring something new to the table, who offer something no one else can give, who shake things up and challenge what cinema and storytelling can do. And in doing so, they're not going to please everybody. Every choice comes with a cost. Every bold move is a risk, and what moves, astounds, and inspires one person may baffle, frustrate, and bore another. That's the nature of art. But without filmmakers willing to take risks and do something new, without storytellers whose voices stand out from the clamor of the crowd, our culture will stagnate, and our media will continue devolving into soulless sludge. That's why I'm grateful for filmmakers like Robert Eggers, and why we need so many more. I hope you enjoyed this video, because I intend this to be the start of a series about some of my favorite filmmakers and what makes their movies so unique and special, probably following this one up with a video on Christopher Nolan. I'm afraid there's not many directors whose works I've seen enough of to be able to give this kind of video, so it may be a while before I have many of them, but let me know if there's any really unique directors you love who I should add to the list. Thank you so much for joining me, and until next time, never stay silent.